In this video, we explore the animation capabilities of WPF. As a framework, WPF offers a number of features for designing visually appealing and interactive user interfaces. One of its most noted features is its support for animation. In WPF, animations are achieved by applying animations to the specific properties of UI elements. WPF has over 40 predefined animation classes that can be used to animate a variety of property types. These may include the double type, point, color, thickness, vector, etc. Now, it's worth noting that WPF also allows developers to create custom animations that target property types that are not covered by the predefined animation classes. Now, there are several ways of applying animations in WPF, using code behind or storyboards. So with that being said, let's go to Visual Studio and get to the coding. All right, so here in Visual Studio, I already have a WPF project set up. So I'll start by collapsing this Solutions Explorer panel. Now here in the main window.xaml file, I have a stack panel defined with its orientation set to horizontal. And I have 5 buttons placed inside the stack panel. Now you may notice that the buttons appear slightly different from WPF's default buttons. And the reason for that is because I have a style defined here. So in this XAML file, that's all that I have defined. So it's simply a stack panel with 5 buttons and a style to style the buttons. Now there are 2 main ways that we can apply animations in WPF. So we can do it in the XAML or in the code behind. So in XAML, for us to animate, we need to use storyboards. Now in the code behind, we can simply use the animation classes. Now to use a storyboard, you would have to use an action, and this action is called the begin storyboard action. This action can only be done using triggers. So that would be the 3 types of triggers that are available in WPF. That's a property trigger, an event trigger, and a data trigger. In this video, I would like to use the property trigger. And for me to use the property trigger, I can only use it within a style or a control template or a data template. Now suppose I want to apply an animation on an individual button without applying it inside the style. I can simply use the button's triggers and then specify the trigger there. However, this would only allow me to use the event trigger. Now, in this case, I'll be using the property triggers, and that will be done in the style. So here in my style, I'm going to collapse this setter, and I'm going to add in a new style trigger. So I'll say style triggers. And within this trigger collection, I'm going to add a single trigger. Now, triggers allow us to perform actions when specific conditions are met. So I'll say trigger. Now here we have data trigger, event trigger, a property trigger. So we are selecting the property trigger. And I would like to target a property, and this is the is mouse over property. So when this property is set to true, then we can perform an action. Now, triggers allow us to perform 2 types of actions. And right here within this trigger, I can define the 2 actions. And these are the enter actions and the exit actions. So I can simply say trigger, then specify the action. So I'll say the enter action. So the enter actions, so we can specify the actions that we want the trigger to perform. I'll add in the exit actions as well. When the condition here is met, we can perform the actions that we define here. When the condition here is no longer met, we can perform the exit actions. So here, for us to apply an animation, we need to use the begin storyboard action. Now in this video, I'll be animating the height and the width of these buttons. So I'm going to add in a begin storyboard action. Then within this begin storyboard, I'm going to define a storyboard. Now, storyboards allow us to group animations together as well as manage them. So here, because the height and the width property of the button are of the type double, so the best animation I can use is the double animation. So I'm going to add in a double animation. Now I would like to specify the target property that I'll be animating, because this button has a number of properties. So to do that, I'll use an attached property, and that is the storyboard target property. So I'm going to specify that I would like to animate the width. Now I would like to animate this width to a specific value. Now let's scroll down here to our button. Right now the width is set to 100. I would like to animate it to 130. So I'll set it to 130. Now I'm going to define the duration of the animation. So I'm going to use the time format. So I'll say 0 hours, 0 minutes. Then I would like to animate it in 0.3 seconds. Now the animation class here, which is the double animation, allows us to also set other types of properties, like from what value I would like to animate. Now in this case, I don't want to specify a fixed value. I would simply like to animate from whatever value is the width. So I will leave that property out. Another property that we can set is the auto reverse. So this simply means once the animation is done, it would start reversing. We are going to omit this as well. So that's it for the width property. So I'll copy this animation, then I'll paste it. Now this time I'm going to animate the height property. And our height is set to 120. So I'd like to animate it to 150. That would mean I'll be adding 30 pixels. All right, so we have the interactions defined. So simply increase the size of this button whenever the mouse enters. But when the mouse leaves, I would like to animate back to the original size. So that means I'll be placing some actions in the exit actions here. So I'll copy this begin storyboard action. Then I'll paste it in the exit actions. Now here, I would like to animate back to 100 and to 120. So that should be it. Now here, we understand that this style is being applied to the button. So that simply means when we run this application, we should expect this animation to work. So I'm going to go ahead and test the application. All right, so the application is up and running. So just maximize the application. And I'll try to hover over the buttons. And we can see, once I leave the button, it animates back to the original value. And we set that in the exit actions. So I can simply hover over the buttons and we see that action. Now the animation is a bit linear. We can actually change the acceleration of the animation. So I'll go ahead and close this. And that can be done by simply defining a property on the double animation. And this is the acceleration ratio. So this is a value from 0 to 1. So we can set it to 0.3 and we would notice a difference in the animation. However, WPF also allows us to have more control of the animation, and that can be done by simply specifying an ease-in function. So I can simply say I would like to add in an ease-in function to this double animation. So I'll say double, and I'll specify the ease-in function. So I can simply add a new function. Now there are a number of ease-in functions that we can use. So we have the back ease, bounce, cubic, circle, elastic. We can try to use the elastic ease. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify this on the other animation as well. So I'll just simply copy. Now the reason we have to open the tag is because the is function is its own object. So we can't simply specify within this property here. So I'll just paste that. Okay, so let's go ahead and run the application. All right, so I'm going to expand and try to hover. Now notice that it has a bounce to it. And that's because we set the isIn function to an elastic is. All right, we also have circle is, so we can change that to circle. And let's try the application. All right, it's up and running. Let me expand. So it's kind of similar to the default, though it's kind of smooth. It's a bit smooth. We can also try out the bounce ease. All right, so the application is up and running. So I'll give it a try. And it's similar to the elastic ease. All right, so I'll go ahead and close this. Okay, so I'll just get rid of this. All right, now suppose I wanted to animate the background color. Now, because the background color is a brush, I would have to use a different type of animation. So in this case, I can simply use the color animation. So I'll say color animation. And this time I'll say storyboard, target property, and I'll set it to the background. I would like to animate the background to a shade of orange. So I'll simply say choreo. Okay. For the duration, I'd like to set it to 0.3 seconds. Now here, we have a slight problem. The problem is that the background property of the button is of the type brush, but the animation we're using is a color animation. Now these two properties are incompatible. However, we can still animate the background. The reason is because the brush has got a color property defined on it. So to access that property, I can simply cast here. So I'm going to say solid color brush, and that's because the background is of a type solid color brush. So I'll say solid . Now I'm going to access the color property of the solid color brush. So I'll simply say dot color, and that should do it. All right, so I'm going to do the same for the exit action. But for the exit action, I would like to animate it back to white. All right, so let's go ahead and try the application. All right, so the application is up and running. So let's give it a try, and we see nothing happens. Let's just close it. All right, so probably we have something wrong. Okay, so it's here. We misspelled background. So simply add an R, then try the application again. All right, and you see, we now have the animation. So it's animating to orange and then animating back to white. All right, so I'll go ahead and close this. Now at this point, I'd like to perform animations in the code behind. So what I'll simply do is I'll get rid of everything that we have done so far. So right here, I'll get rid of this trigger section. So that means animation is no more. I can try the application and just verify. All right, so there we go. So we don't have any animations anymore. So I'll close this. Now for us to perform animations in the code behind, we need to reference these buttons. So we can do that by naming each individual button, but that would be kind of cumbersome. So what I'm going to do is I'll simply write some logic that's going to help us identify that a button has been hovered over. All right, so I'm going to do that by specifying the mouse hover event, the mouse enter event rather. Then I'll create a new event handler. I'll do the same for the mouse leave event. So I'll specify a new handler for that as well. All right, so let's go to the code behind. So here we have two event handlers defined. How do we get the reference to the button? We can simply do that by using this sender object. We know that the button initiated the event handler, so the sender will be simply our button. So I'm going to create a variable and I'll simply say button and this button will be equal to the sender. Now we simply just can't use the object, we need to cast it as a button. So I'll simply say as button. All right, now that we have our button, we can now perform some animations. So I'm going to create an animation. So I'll simply say var, then I'll say width, width animation is equal to a new double animation. So I'd like to specify the properties of the double animation. So I'll set the to property to 130. Then I'll also set the duration. I'll set it to a time span. So I'll say time span. So there's a method that I can use on the time span, and that's the 2 seconds method, rather from seconds method. So I can simply specify the seconds. So I'll say 0.3 seconds. All right, so this double animation will be animating to 130 and the duration will be set to 0.3 seconds. So I'll copy this animation and paste. However, this time I'll set it to the height animation. So I'll say height and I'll be animating to 150 and I'll keep the same duration. Now in the code behind, to animate, you have to reference the element you would like to animate. So in this case, it's our button. So I'll simply take the button and use a method on the button, and that's the begin animation method. This method allows me to specify 2 arguments. So the first argument is the property that I would like to animate, and the property is the width property. This property is defined on the button class. So I'll say button, then I'll simply specify the width property. Now here you notice that it has the word property here, so it's a width property. So this is because this is defined as a dependency property. Now for the second argument, I'll simply specify the animation I want to use. And in this case, I'll use the width animation. Then I'll close it off. So I'll simply copy this line of code and begin an animation for the height as well. So this time I'll set it to the height property. And the height animation. Okay, so that should do it. So this simply means when the mouse enters over the button, we get the button and we perform the animation. So I'll copy this line of code, the whole block actually, and I'll paste it in the other event handler. This time I'll animate to the original values, so that's 100 and 120. Okay, so let's go back to the code behind, to the XAML rather. Now here, this event handler is only set on this button. So I would like to set these event handlers on all the buttons. All right, so that's it. So once the mouse hovers, this event handler is going to be executed. And when that happens, we simply get the sender and we animate the height and width. All right, so let's go ahead and try the application. All right, so the application is up and running. So let's try it over. And there we go, we see the animation. Now, if you want to create more complex animations, you can just simply explore and try to experiment. So that's it for today's video. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you find this content useful. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.